Chapter 42, Home Truths. Jon followed her to her rooms, with Ghost walking closely beside him. He wanted to talk more after their conversation in the crypts, and he sensed that she did too. However, when they arrived, he discovered they were not alone. Sitting at the edge of her bed, dressed in his nightclothes, was Hodder, clearly agitated as he shook and trembled. Hodder, he said when he saw Nan. "Oh, my poor boy, here, drink this," Nan said, grabbing a mug of water. "Hodder," the giant man replied, taking the mug from her. Jon watched as she comforted him. He had never been entirely sure of their relationship, grandson, great-grandson, great-great-grandson. To figure it out, one would need to know just how old Nan was, and that was a mystery no one could unravel. Eventually, Hodder calmed down, looking up at Jon with a smile before saying his familiar word. For some reason, Jon had always understood him well. "Hodder," he said with a smile, which Jon returned. "It's good to see you too, Hodder." "Walder," Nan interjected. "What?" "His name is Walder, not Hodder." "I want you to help him, Jon Snow." "Only you can." "Help him? How?" "As you do with Ghost, you must do with Walder," Nan said, looking at him curiously. Jon stared at her, unsure if she was losing her mind. Over the years, many had probably thought she was crazy, but there was no sign of it in her eyes. In fact, she looked more alert than he had ever seen her. At first, he had chalked it up to his memory playing tricks, but now, as he examined her closely, she seemed almost younger. "I can't do that with a person," Jon said. "Who says you can't? You have a gift given to you by the old gods themselves. Do you think they put limits on their gifts, Jon Snow?" "I don't. I mean, but a person? It's no different than a wolf. Haven't you learned anything while running through the woods as Ghost? You can do this, Jon. I've been waiting since the day your uncle left for the Vale for you to come and help my boy." Despite his reluctance to believe her words, despite his own skepticism about the possibility of what she was suggesting, and despite the nagging feeling that what he was about to do was wrong, Jon felt Ghost come up beside him. As he ran his hand through the wolf's thick fur, he realized he had already made up his mind to help. He turned to Hodder, whose real name was Walder, and noticed something he had never seen before: pain. There was a deep sorrow in his eyes, and Jon felt ashamed for never considering him capable of such emotion. "I'll try," Jon said. "Do or do not, there is no try," Nan replied firmly. Jon nodded, extending his hand toward Walder, who appeared just as nervous as he felt. He glanced at Ghost, who stepped closer, and Jon took Walder's hand, gently placing it on the wolf's head. He watched as Walder began to stroke the fur, a look of happiness crossing his face. Seeing him calm down, Jon grabbed a chair and positioned it in front of the bed. He sat down, closed his eyes, and reached out to form the connection. He quickly found Ghost, but that was all he could see in the room. So, he moved further away, rising from the confines of the room, out into the keep, and then outside into the open air. Before he could gather his bearings, he transformed into a raven and soared over the broken tower, gliding above the bell tower and into the God's Wood. The heart tree stood out like a beacon, its presence overshadowing everything else around it. He flew towards it and landed among its branches. Above him, perched on another branch, was another raven. As he focused on it, he noticed it had 3 eyes. He cawed loudly, and the raven remained still for a moment before taking flight. Jon took off after it, chasing it as it flew back over the towers, over the courtyard, and out of the grounds of Winterfell, cawing all the while. Jon flew north, but soon found himself back above the castle. Below him, he spotted Ghost beside a larger, brighter figure. Curious, he swooped closer, the light intensifying until, in an instant, it vanished. He found himself in a cave filled with roots and winding tunnels. But he was no longer a raven. As he reached out, he discovered arms and hands. He was a man. He touched the cool walls of the tunnel and began to walk, the sound of sobbing echoing from deep within. Running now, the sobbing grew louder until he reached a dead end. In front of him stood a closed door. He approached it and pushed it open. Sitting on the ground on the other side was a crying boy. Though boy was a loose term, the child was at least twice his size. Jon looked at him and instinctively reached out a hand, wanting to wipe away his tears. "Help me," the boy said. "I will," Jon promised. "I don't want to." "Don't let them make me." "Make you?" "I don't want to." "What don't you want to do?" "I don't want to hold the door." "Please, don't let them make me." The boy looked up, desperation in his eyes. "Walder?" Jon asked, recognizing some of the boy's features. "Are you the White Wolf?" How did you know?" "She told me about you, the White Wolf. That you'd come for me if I was ever scared, but you never did." Walder's sobs intensified. "I'm sorry. I'm here now. Come with me, I'll take you home." "I can't. They won't let me. I have to hold the door." "No, you don't." "I do. As long as the door is there, I have to hold it." Jon felt his eyelids grow heavy and reached out to grasp Walder's hand. He sensed her presence in the distance, flying toward him with a speed he had never witnessed before. "Step back," he said to Walder as he closed the door and moved them both to one side. She landed gracefully in front of them, and Jon locked eyes with her striking purple gaze before shifting his focus back to the door. "Dracarys," he commanded, and the flames consumed the door, reducing it to nothing but ash. "Walder, it's time to go home," he said, guiding the boy to climb onto the back of the dragon. "Suvkin," he called, and the white dragon unfurled her magnificent blue wings, taking to the air. The next morning, Jon awoke feeling as if he had experienced the strangest dream. A throbbing headache greeted him, and as he stood, he nearly toppled over. He staggered to his table and quickly drank some water. After washing up and dressing, he glanced around to see Ghost lying on the floor, watching him. Nodding at the wolf, they left the room. He desperately needed to break his fast. As he entered the hall, Jon realized he was either very early or very late, though he couldn't tell which. Food was available, so he sat down, feeding Ghost first. Just then, he looked up to see his sisters arriving. "Jon, are you feeling well?" Sansa asked, worry evident in her voice. "What?" "Oh, I'm fine." "Why?" He replied, slightly puzzled. "Your nose, Jon." "It's bleeding," Sansa pointed out, and Jon glanced down to see drops of blood on his tunic. "It's nothing to worry about, little sister." "It happens sometimes," he reassured her, accepting the handkerchief she offered. "Will you make my bow today?" Arya asked, taking a bite of sausage. "Arya, can't you see he's hurt?" Sansa interjected, shaking her head. "He said he was fine." "You are, aren't you?" Arya pressed, concern in her eyes. Jon ruffled her hair and smiled. I'm fine, little wolf." Just then, Walder entered the hall, grabbing a meal and moving to a table at the back. Jon couldn't let him go. He needed to know if last night had been just a dream. "Walder, come sit with us," he called, drawing confused looks from Sansa, Arya, and others in the hall. "Who's Walder?" Arya asked as the boy approached. "Jon, that's hotter, silly," Sansa giggled. "Good," Jon replied, relieved to see his friend. "Good morning, Jon," Walder said as he sat down. Both of Jon's sisters looked at him in shock, while Jon smiled, realizing that everything from last night had actually happened. After finishing her breakfast and overcoming her surprise at discovering that Hodder was actually named Walder, and far from being the simpleton everyone thought, Sansa found him to be quite sweet and clever. She insisted that Jon be checked out by the maester, and she and Arya headed off to their lessons with the septa. Sansa had hoped Lady Mira would join them, as the girls seemed to have recovered from her illness. However, Mira had told them that she was of the North, and the North didn't suffer septas. Arya had burst into laughter at that and declared that since she was of the North, she shouldn't have to suffer the septas either. Despite that, Sansa had insisted Arya accompany her to the lesson. The truth was, neither girl wanted to attend lessons today. Spending time with Jon and his friend the day before had been the most fun Sansa had experienced in ages. Both Jon and Loras had been chivalrous and kind, genuinely enjoying their time with her and Arya, something Robb never did. "Lady Sansa, what are you sewing?" Septa Mordane asked, pulling Sansa from her daydream. "A handkerchief for my brother Jon," Sansa replied, glancing down at the fabric she had chosen to embroider a white wool for him. "You shouldn't make things for that boy, Lady Sansa," the Septa said, shaking her head disapprovingly. "That boy, as you call him, is my brother Jon, and I'll make him whatever I choose, Septa," Sansa said firmly, ignoring Arya's giggle beside her. "He's your half-brother, Lady Sansa." "Really?" "He looks like a full brother to me," Arya chimed in, and this time it was Sansa who giggled. "Lady Arya," the Septa said, clearly annoyed. The girls couldn't help but laugh now, and with that, the Septa stormed out of the room, leaving them to their own devices. Within seconds, Arya was up and, as they headed for the door, Sansa was surprised when Arya looked back at her. "Coming?" Arya asked, and Sansa couldn't resist following her. They made their way to the training yard, where they spotted Theon and Robb sparring, both boys showing off their skills. Soon, they were joined by Jojen and Mira, and Sansa welcomed the chance to speak with them. "Lady Mira, Lord Jojen," she greeted politely. "It's just Mira, Lady Sansa," Mira replied with a friendly smile. "I'm Arya," her sister chimed in, eyeing the spear Mira was skillfully spinning in her hands. "Are Jon and Loras not with you?" Jojen asked. Jon was bleeding from the nose earlier, so he went to see Maester Luwin. "I haven't seen Lord Loras yet," Sansa explained. "Here they are now," Arya exclaimed, running ahead and being caught and spun around by Jon as he and Loras approached. "Lady Sansa," Loras said as he reached them first, while Jon continued to playfully spin Arya, though at a slower pace now. "Lord Loras," Sansa replied softly. "Jon, how are you feeling?" she asked when Jon and Arya finally stopped their playful antics. "I'm good, little sister." "I told you there was nothing to worry about," Jon reassured her. "Mira, are you feeling better?" he asked. So good that I came for a spar." "I believe you owe me one," Mira said cheekily, earning a look of disbelief from Arya. "You spar?" Arya asked, surprised. Mira is really good too," Loras added, nodding in agreement, which Mira acknowledged with a smile. "So, Jon, you ready?" But only if you promise to go easy on me," Jon said, grinning, while Mira shook her head in amusement. "What's this? Asking a girl to go easy on you, Snow? I thought you competed in tourneys." Robb's loud voice boomed from where he and Theon had been listening. "How many tourneys have you competed in, Lord Robb?" "Oh, that's right, none, isn't it?" Loras teased, prompting giggles from the group. "Yes, but if they're easy enough for Snow to win, then Robb would have won more than two," Loras shot back with a laugh. Theon laughed. "So, what do you say, Snow? Up for a spar?" Robb chimed in. Sansa shook her head at Jon, not wanting to see them fight. Robb, however, just smirked as Jon walked over to her. He leaned in and whispered in her ear, "Don't worry, little sister. I have no intention of fighting him." She smiled back at him, relieved. "Not today, Robb," Jon said to her brother. "See, it's true what they say, Robb, bastards are cowardly by nature," Theon teased, and both he and Robb burst into laughter. "As opposed to the Ironborn, whose bravery is known throughout the realm," Sansa shot back sarcastically, and aside from Theon and Robb, everyone else laughed. Why, you little brat, Theon said, stepping forward threateningly. Sansa had never seen anyone move as quickly as Jon did in that moment. Loras stepped in front of her, blocking her view, but when she looked again, Theon was on the ground, and Jon was stepping back toward them, grabbing his tourney sword from Arya, who had picked it up. Fine. You want a spar? I'll give you a spar. Which of you is first? Jon said angrily. Jon, please, Sansa pleaded, but Loras leaned down to whisper to her. Let him do this, Sansa. She looked at her brother and nodded. What's that? Your bravery left you both. I said, which of you is first? Jon paced back and forth, his frustration palpable. Theon stood up and stormed over to grab a tourney sword. Sansa watched as more people arrived. She spotted Lord Jaime coming with some guards and looked up to see her father watching from the walkway, while her mother joined him. Enough, her father shouted. No. Jon shouted back. They wanted a spar, so let them have one. Or is honor just a word here, Lord Stark? Sansa looked on in shock. No one had ever spoken to her father that way. She saw her mother say something to him, and then he nodded, looking down. Fine, but this will be done properly, sire. Roderick, prepare them properly, she instructed, watching as the old knight led Robb and Theon to one side. Jon approached her, his anger nearly dissipated. I'm sorry, little sister. He insulted you, and I won't stand for it, Jon said firmly. I don't want anyone hurt over me, she replied softly. I won't hurt them, Sansa, but they need to learn a lesson. Robb shouldn't allow him to speak like that about you either. He leaned in and hugged her, and she felt tears prick at her eyes. He seemed to sense her vulnerability and held her a moment longer. When he finally released her, he smiled, and she felt a little better. After a few more minutes, Ser Roderick returned with Robb and Theon, both wearing helmets and protective padding. The knight approached Jon, urging him to gear up as well, but Jon simply shook his head. Roderick then glanced at her father, who nodded, while her mother stood beside him, wearing an expression Sansa couldn't quite decipher. Very well, as you wish, Snow. Theon, you're up first, Roderick announced. Sansa watched as Theon readied himself, glancing around to see Lord Jaime smirking at her father, and Mira and Arya eagerly petting Ghost as they observed. Jojen looked on with an almost bored expression, while Loras gripped his own tournament sword tightly. As Jon faced Theon, Sansa winced at how much larger Theon was compared to her brother. He towered over Jon by at least a head, and although he was slim, he was undoubtedly heavier. This won't last long, Loras remarked, and Sansa frowned, worry creasing her forehead. He won't hurt Jon, will he? She asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. Loras chuckled. Sansa, he won't even see him. Just then, Ser Roderick gave the signal. Theon swung his sword heavily, and in that moment, everything seemed to slow down for her. She watched the blade arc toward Jon's head, and her heart raced as she feared he would be struck. He wasn't there. Instead, he was positioned behind Theon. Sansa heard the clang of the sword striking Theon's back, and a moment later, Theon was sprawled on the ground. She glanced around and noticed the astonishment on several faces. Jory Castle was laughing as he watched the spar. Yield, Jon said, and when Sansa looked back, she saw him kneeling on Theon's chest, his sword poised at Theon's neck. Yield, Jon repeated, this time louder. No, Theon coughed, shifting uncomfortably beneath Jon's knee. It's done, Snow. You won, Roderick called out, while Robb watched nervously from the sidelines. Jon got up off Theon and stepped back, waiting for Robb to move forward. Sansa looked up at her father, noting the mix of pride and concern etched on his face. Her mother was speaking to him, agitated, while he shook his head in response. Eventually, Robb grasped his sword and positioned himself to face Jon. This time, the fight wasn't quick. Jon skillfully dodged Robb's swings, occasionally aligning his sword for a clear strike but never following through. Sansa watched as Jon gracefully sidestepped when Robb swung left, his sword missing while Jon's blade was aimed at Robb's neck. He ducked when Robb aimed for his head, leaving Jon's sword pointed at Robb's chest. It was as if Jon were performing a dance, while Robb struggled to land a hit. Not once did Robb come close to touching Jon, and not once did Jon attempt to strike him. "Why doesn't he finish it?" Arya asked, and Mira laughed softly. "It was over before it started," Jojen said, and Sansa couldn't help but agree. But still, Jon held back. The end came when Robb fell to his knees, exhausted. Sansa watched as Jon held his sword to Robb's neck, just barely grazing his skin. "Yield?" Jon asked. I yield," Robb replied breathlessly. Jon nodded and extended his hand to help Robb up. Sansa was surprised to see. Sansa felt a sense of relief as she watched her brothers, happy that they hadn't harmed each other. When the match concluded and the crowd began to disperse from the yard, Mira stepped forward. "You still owe me a spar, you know," she said, prompting laughter from the others as Sansa joined in. "I do indeed." "Shall we?" Jon replied with a grin. Just then, Sansa heard her father's voice from the walkway. "Jon, may I speak with you?" "Of course, my lord." "Perhaps we could go to the God's Wood?" Jon suggested, frowning slightly. I'll see you there in a few moments," her father answered. Sansa noticed that her mother was no longer beside him. "It seems we must wait another day, Mira," Jon said with a smirk. "I'm beginning to think you fear me, Jon Snow," Mira teased, and Arya laughed. "Of course I do, I've seen you fight, remember?" Jon replied, turning to walk away with Ghost following closely, even though he hadn't called the wolf. Ned watched Jon spar, still in shock. Jaime hadn't been lying, he hadn't seen such a natural swordsman since Ser Arthur Dayne. Watching Jon dismantle Theon was one thing, but the way he had shown up Robb was another entirely. Catelyn had been furious, storming past him with a thunderous look on her face. At least he was glad to see his boys shake hands at the end, but he couldn't understand what had driven Jon to challenge Robb so fiercely. Something must have happened when he arrived. Had someone insulted Jon? Made a comment about his birth? Or his mother? Whatever it was, it had clearly enraged the boy. Yet, Jon had remained calm when he called out to Ned, invoking honor. What did he mean by that? Did it have something to do with King's Landing? Wasn't honor questioned there as well? He needed to speak to Jon and felt relieved that his son had chosen to meet him in the God's Wood. He hoped Jon still held on to their gods, that he still adhered to the old ways. Going south had changed Jon in many ways. He was more confident now and carried himself differently. Ned hoped, more than anything, that the boy he had raised was still somewhere inside Jon. Seeing him adhere to the old gods reassured Ned, and so he made his way to the God's Wood to speak with his son. When he arrived, he smiled at the sight. Jon was kneeling on one knee, his hand resting on the ancient tree. Ned paused for a moment, waiting until Jon finished his prayer before moving closer. He noticed the white wolf watching him warily, and when Jon turned around, Ned thought, for the briefest moment, that his eyes had changed color. But when he blinked, he saw the familiar gray. "Lord Stark," Jon said, and Ned felt his heart tighten. It had been one thing to speak so formally yesterday, but in this sacred place, there was no need for such distance. "You can call me father when we're alone, Jon," he said, smiling gently. "Why would I do that, uncle?" Jon replied. Ned felt his world spin out of control. Jon knew. How? Was it Jaime? Or had Howland revealed the truth? He had arrived with his children. Had his old friend gone against the oath he'd sworn? No, that seemed unlikely. It was the Lannisters. He should have guessed. He had been a fool to think that the fallen knight would be content to wait until Jon was older, until the danger had passed. "Jon, Ned stumbled over his words. What's wrong, uncle? Cat got your tongue? Jon asked. Why did Lannister tell you? Ned struggled to articulate. Why? Why? Because it's my right to know who I am, is it not? It's my right to know who my mother was, who my father was. But then again, why would you care about my rights? Jon's voice rose with anger. I've always cared for you, Jon, Ned said, trying to reach out. Have you cared for me or more about your friend who sits on my throne? Robert won. Robert stole. Gods, even now, here in this sacred place, you'd still pick him over me if given the choice. Jon, No, uncle, not now, not yet. Pray to the gods for guidance, uncle. You'll need it, Jon said, his tone heavy with frustration. What do you mean? Ned asked, confused. We'll talk later when I'm calmer. Right now, you have bigger worries than me. I don't understand, Ned replied, his brow furrowing. No, you really don't. I've been here a day, and I can understand it better than you. Gods, she was right, the wolves really have left this place. She was right? Who? What are you talking about, Jon? What wolves? Ned's confusion deepened. This wasn't the conversation he expected. Your son is a disappointment. Do you have any idea what people think of Robb? Jon exclaimed. Robb? What about my son? Ned's anger began to rise. You've allowed him to become arrogant and cocky. He spends all his time with an Ironborn, here in the heart of the North. Do you want to know what that spar was about, uncle? Do you even care? What? Ned asked, his frustration mounting. That damn squid hostage called my sister a bitch and made a move to strike her, while your son stood by and did nothing, not a damn thing. Yesterday, he practically threw the gift I brought him back in my face. Since I've been here, they've spent their time snickering and laughing at me while disrespecting Loras, Mira, and Jojen. I didn't know, Ned said, shaking his head. That's the problem, uncle, Jon replied as he began to move away. What happened in King's Landing? Didn't your wife already tell you? I'm sure her brother has sent her ravens by now. Tell me, Ned demanded, his determination clear. Your good brother got drunk and took it upon himself to insult my mother, your sister. He called her a whore and said my father must have found her in a brothel. When I spoke back to him, he tried to strike me, not once, but twice, falling on his arse each time. I left it at that, but then he decided to insult Jaime and my mother again before demanding that I apologize. So I told. Some truths he didn't want to hear, and I left. What truths? Ned asked, concern creeping into his voice. About his house and their actions, Jon replied, shaking his head. What happened next? How did you end up jousting him? Oh, that part was thanks to both your good brother and your foster father, along with my refusal to let them maim me over hurt pride and make a point. Wait, what? Maim? What did he mean by that, and what role did Jon Arryn play in all this? Ned had heard none of it. What happened, Jon? He pressed. They held a trial. Edmure lied, and Jon Arryn backed him up. At first, they tried to do it without the king noticing, but surprisingly, Robert was sober enough to attend. They couldn't just sentence me without evidence. In the end, despite having done nothing wrong, they demanded I apologize. I mean, I'm a bastard after all, right? Jon's voice was laced with bitterness. Jon, Don't say it, Jon interrupted, lowering his head before looking back at Ned. Anyway, I refused when Edmure wouldn't apologize for what he said about my mother and father. So, I asked for an honor duel, with the loser required to apologize. And despite what you might have heard about me tricking your good brother, as bastards are often accused of doing, I beat him. And guess what, uncle? It seems trueborns don't hold to their honor either, because Edmure refused to apologize to me. I did, however, eventually get him to apologize to my mother and father. Now, if that's all, uncle. Jon, we need to talk. We do. But you need to think about a lot of things, uncle. We'll meet tomorrow. Ned watched as his nephew walked away, the dire wolf at his side. His mind was racing with the revelations he had just absorbed. Had he failed his family even more than he realized? If what Jon said was true, then yes, his son hadn't stood up for his sister. Ned realized, no, damn it, Jon was right, he had been a hostage. Had he really been blind to it all? He needed to speak with his children and find out what was happening in his home. The wolves had left. What did that mean? Who was she? Lyanna? Was he speaking of his sister? What had happened in King's Landing? If Jon was telling the truth, then Edmure hadn't shared the whole story, and Jon Arryn had never sent him a raven with any information. Had they really tried to maim him? That couldn't be true. Surely Jon Arryn wouldn't allow such a thing. Could Jon be lying? He was angry, but could he have made it all up? No, he wouldn't do that, would he? Ned knew he needed to talk to those who were there with Jon, Lady Dacey, the small Jon. They would be arriving soon for the wedding, and he would speak to them then. As for everything else, he didn't even know where to begin. Jon knew the truth. Was he staking his claim? It seemed that way. What was he to do? Choose the brother he had chosen or the boy who was his blood? He knelt down, pressed his hand against the tree, and began to pray, hoping his gods would guide him. Meanwhile, Jaime waited for Jon outside the gates of the Gods' Wood. Loras had moved to join him, but he signaled for Loras to stay with Jon's sisters. So, he stood alone, with Jors and Allers positioned a little ways off, guarding Jon discreetly until he had spoken to Ned Stark. He had arrived just in time to see Jon challenge his brother and the squid to spar. When he saw the anger radiating from Jon, he feared for them both. But instead of losing control, Jon showcased a quiet rage. In the blink of an eye, he dismantled the squid, but what he did to his brother was even worse. He embarrassed him, demonstrating just how far below him he was in terms of skill. It reminded Jaime a little of himself, years earlier, when someone had done the same to him. Jaime recalled the time he had called his brother a demon monkey while they were in the sparring yard. Infuriated, he had given the boy a lesson he would never forget. Watching Jon's intense display here reminded him of that moment, and he understood just how angry he must have been. He just needed to uncover the source of that anger. When Ned called to speak to Jon, Jaime hoped Jon would deny him the opportunity, allowing him to speak first. But Jon had come to this God's Wood, and his uncle had followed. So, Jaime waited. He breathed a sigh of relief as he saw Jon and Ghost approaching the gate. Jon didn't look angry or agitated, and, more importantly, Jaime sensed no sadness on his king's face. "Are you all right?" Jaime asked. But I need a ride." "Care to join me?" Jon replied. "Sure, why not? I'm sure Honor would enjoy a run, but I'm not racing you," Jaime joked, pleased to hear Jon laugh in response. "No, we wouldn't want to do that again. One bear attack is more than enough for one trip," Jaime smirked as they walked toward the stables. When Loras saw them, he approached, telling Jon's sisters to wait, though neither listened. They, along with Mira and Jojen, walked over to join the conversation. "Everything all right?" Loras asked, glancing between Jon and Jaime. Lord Jaime and I were going for a ride." "You coming?" Jon asked, and Loras nodded. "Can I come?" Arya piped up. "Not this time, little wolf." "Perhaps another," Jon said with a smile, then turned to Mira when he noticed the frown on Arya's face. "Arya, why don't you come with me?" "I'll show you how to use a spear," Mira suggested, and Arya's frown was quickly replaced by enthusiastic nodding. Are you sure you're all right, Jon? Sansa asked softly. I'm good, little sister. I'll be back in a little bit. Is there anything you'd like to do when I return? I don't know. Could you teach me how to draw? She asked, looking at him doubtfully. If that's what you want, Jon replied, and Sansa beamed at him with a full smile. After they said goodbye to the girls and to Jojen, who had declined the offer to join them since he wasn't the best horseman, they made their way to the stables to ready their horses. After speaking with the stable master and having a quiet conversation with the giant boy who seemed to help out everywhere, they saddled up and set off. As they passed Ned Stark on their way out of the gate, he looked at them with a hint of worry. But Jon quickly reassured him, saying they were just heading out for a short ride. Ned asked for time to prepare some guards, but since they had more than enough, he reluctantly let them go. Wintertown was a small village, and Jaime found it somewhat depressing. Jon seemed to feel the same way, judging by the looks he gave the buildings and the main square, shaking his head repeatedly in disapproval. What are you thinking, Jon? Jaime asked. This town, look at it. It's like no one has done anything to it in years. It's just been left like this. It wouldn't even take much, Jon replied, and Jaime couldn't help but agree. Why don't they do more with it? Loras asked. It's only ever full during the winters, so the thinking is that it's not worth it the rest of the time. But if it were better maintained, if some work were done. Jon sighed. As they rode through the town, people looked on with curiosity. Jon rode Winter almost casually, while Ghost matched him stride for stride. It must have been an imposing sight to those not on horseback, Jaime thought. Until he had come north, he had no idea how dire wolves were perceived here. At the Rock, Ghost was almost part of the furniture. He had been there since he was a pup, and despite his size, people still regarded him as one of them. In Lannisport, the sight of Jon and Ghost was as familiar as that of the Pinnacle ships, and no one paid them much mind. But here, in the north, wolves, dire wolves were legendary creatures, and seeing one walk calmly beside a Stark carried immense significance. It was a symbol, a living representation of their sigil, and Jon was the first Stark in generations to have one. Jaime couldn't help but smirk at the thought of another symbol Jon might soon possess. If the wolf inspired such awe, what would people think of a dragon? They quickly left the town behind, and with a nod from Jon, they set off at a brisk pace. The open field soon transformed into the shadows of the woods ahead. Jaime watched as Ghost glanced up at Jon before darting ahead, proving that even Winter couldn't keep up with the wolf in full flight. As they entered the woods, they slowed down, and Jaime observed Jon guiding them along a slightly overgrown path until they reached a small pond. They dismounted, and Jon gestured for him to follow. He instructed the guards to stay back while he and Loras walked to a set of rocks arranged like seats and sat down. I told my uncle that I know, Jon said as he settled onto the stones. What did he say? Jaime asked eagerly. We didn't really discuss it further. I wasn't in the right frame of mind. Besides, he needs to get his own house in order first. What do you mean? Loras inquired. You saw it today, Loras. How the squid behaves, strolling around here like he owns the place. If you were one of my uncle's bannermen, how would you feel about that? And as for Robb, during our time in the north, I've longed for news of my brother, but every time I tried to ask, people would change the subject. It wasn't until we arrived that I understood why. But despite his behavior, despite the squid, how could you not stand up for your sister? Jon said, his voice tinged with sadness. I don't know, Jon, Loras admitted. If it were Marjorie and I were in your position, what would you have done if I had said that about her? Jon pressed. You wouldn't, though, Jon. You're nothing like him, Loras replied. But what if I were? What if I did? Then I'd knock you on your arse. Your damn arse, Loras said, and Jon laughed, nodding in agreement. So that was what had happened. The Ironborn had said or done something to Jon's sister, and Robb had just stood there. No wonder he'd been so angry. But this was the second time Robb had let his anger get the best of him. First with the Umbers, and now with his brother and the Ironborn. This wasn't good. Jon wasn't an angry boy, and if he couldn't control this, it could lead to problems later. "Jon, you shouldn't let yourself get so worked up," Jaime said. I know. It's just. It's what, Jon?" "Rhaenys," Jon said under his breath. "What about her?" Jaime asked. "I wasn't there for her. I should have been there for her, but I wasn't. I won't, not for anyone else." "I won't allow it," Jon said. Jaime stood up and walked over to him, then sat down beside him. "Jon, But he couldn't find the words. His own guilt over Jon's sister held him back, so instead, he placed his arm around Jon's shoulder, allowing him to lean in. He could feel Jon trying to rein in his emotions, and after a while, it seemed he had. "I told my uncle about King's Landing. He didn't seem to know about the trial," Jon said, doubt evident in his voice. "I'm not surprised," Jaime replied, and Jon looked at him. "My lord?" "Well, I doubt the Trout told him, and there's no way Jon Arryn did." "Why wouldn't Jon Arryn tell him?" Loras asked. "What would he have told him?" "Not the truth. So he would have needed to lie. But there were witnesses, people saw what happened. The truth could have gotten back to Jon's uncle. There's no way Jon Arryn is that foolish." Instead, he just said nothing in hope the news wouldn't reach him, Jaime explained. Jon nodded in understanding. "Do you think your uncle will back your claim?" Loras asked. "I don't know, Loras. Frankly, I don't care," Jon replied. Though both he and Loras could tell he was lying, Jaime replied, "Why though? If he backs you, then you'll have 2 of the kingdoms behind you, and that's without counting those loyal to your family." Loras raised an eyebrow, and Jaime hid a smirk, knowing that by the time Jon made his claim, he would have far more support than Loras realized. "Of course I want him to back me, Loras. I want the North to support me, but at this point, I just don't care. He either does or he doesn't. There's an old Stark saying, when the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. So he'll support you then?" Loras asked, smiling. "He will if he's a wolf, Loras. But it won't matter if he doesn't." "Why's that?" Loras inquired. "Because I'm not a lone wolf, I'm a dragon," Jon said, a smile creeping across his face. The ride back to Winterfell was first interrupted by Ghost, who had taken down another deer and was now lazily refusing to return just yet. Then the rain came, forcing them to seek shelter in a nearby cave. Eventually, the downpour ceased, but Ghost, who had stubbornly stayed outside, looked miserable as he trudged beside them, his fur soaked. After arriving back and stabling the horses, Jon took Ghost to his room and lit a fire, allowing the wolf to lay down in front of it to warm and dry himself. It turned out that Sansa and Arya had snuck out from their lessons earlier to play in the yard and were now being made to repeat those lessons. Loras had his own duties to attend to, and the Reeds were busy with some ravens from their father. Jon briefly saw Theon and Robb, who gave him very different looks. Theon's expression was a mix of his usual smugness with a touch of anger, while Robb seemed more subdued. So, Jon ended up sitting alone in his room, pondering what to do but coming up empty. Just then, a knock sounded at his door. He opened it to find Walder standing there. "Jon, my grandmother wishes to speak to you." "All right. How are you feeling?" It's different. The way people look at me, how they speak to me." "Thank you, Jon." Walder smiled. "It was your grandmother's idea." Jon nodded to Walder as he locked the door behind him. He made his way to Nan's rooms, passing Luwin on the way. The maester had asked for a moment of his time when Jon was ready, wishing to discuss some ideas he had. However, after recovering from the nosebleed, Jon had decided to postpone that conversation for now. He assured Lewin that they would speak soon, and when asked about the wind wheels, Jon had promised to draw up some of the original plans he had made. He had never expected to feel so short on time here. Yes, he knew he would speak with his uncle, and he wished for nothing more than to spend time with his brothers and sisters, but he hoped to find more moments to just relax. "Are you not coming in?" he asked Walder as they reached Nan's room. "No, I've work to do." "I'll see you later, Jon," Walder replied, walking away. Jon knocked on the door and waited until he was invited to enter. He could barely remember the room from the night before, and as he looked around, he found it almost peculiar compared to the other rooms in Winterfell. It was bright, very bright, though the windows were no larger than any others he had seen. Strangely, it felt colder than most rooms, including his own, and the furniture appeared even older than that in the broken tower. Nan was sitting by the fire, which was lit but didn't give off much heat. She beckoned him over to join her. "My mother was a loyal servant of the old gods, Jon Snow," Nan said before Jon had even made it halfway across the room. "I didn't know that, Nan," Jon replied as he sat down. "No one did, Jon Snow. In all my years, I've not told this story once, and I've shared many a tale, as you remember." Nan laughed softly before continuing. "Many years ago, my mother received a vision while kneeling at the heart tree. She was told she would not wed, but would bear 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, each with a part to play, though they never revealed what those parts would be. My father was a powerful man, and my mother fell deeply in love with him. But like all powerful men, he had his faults, which is a story for another time. When I was born, I barely knew my brother and sister, they were older, you see. By the time I reached girlhood, I had no idea what my life would hold. Then, the gods who spoke to my mother spoke to me as well. So, here I was sent, and here I've waited for more years than you could count." "Waited?" Jon asked, intrigued. "Aye, for you, Jon Snow. The White Wolf. The Winter Dragon. The prince that was promised," Nan said, smiling at him. "I don't understand," Jon replied, shaking his head. "There are things we are not meant to understand until the time is right. I didn't understand why my boy was taken from me so young or why he was left trapped in his body while they tortured his mind. But I knew you would come, and so I held true to my faith. The gods rewarded me," she said with a gentle smile. "Who tortured him? Was that what he meant in the cave?" I suppose it is. I know not what he told you, only that they hurt my boy. You saw it last night, did you not? You saw it in his eyes?" "I saw a boy in pain," Jon admitted. "Indeed, and you set him free." She reached out her hand and took his. "I am old, Jon Snow, and my time is nearing its end. So, ask what you wish to ask, and when next we meet, I will show you why I've been waiting for you all these years." Jon's mind raced with everything Nan had said. This story was just like the many tales she had shared with them as children, tales of the last hero, the Night's King, the Rat's Cook, and the Ice Dragon. He and Robb would huddle together while the oldest person they knew spun her tales. But in all that time, he had never heard her speak with such depth and conviction. There was such conviction and honesty in her voice. This tale she told was different from the others, perhaps she simply believed it more. Despite his desire to know everything, to uncover the exact meaning behind her words, Jon's thoughts drifted to one place, one story. "Tell me about my mother," he said. Nan smiled warmly as she began. "Your mother was unlike anyone I've ever met, aside from my own. She was strong and full of passion, willful and stubborn at times, but with the kindest heart I've ever known. You've likely heard about her prowess on horseback. It seems you've inherited that gift, Jon Snow. But it wasn't just horses. Your mother had an affinity for all animals, big and small, fierce and meek. It didn't matter to her. She stood up for those weaker than herself, fiercely defending them, yet she would stand in front of a charging bear to protect those she cared about. Your mother was a she-wolf, Jon Snow, and like all wolves, she prioritized her pack above all else. She confronted her father when he bullied young Ben, and she called out those who disrespected Ned for his quiet nature. She stood toe-to-toe with Brandon against your grandfather when he refused to let them live their lives for love. Despite her own feelings, she tried to follow her father's wishes. She understood how much Ned cared for the stag, but she could never be tamed, not by a man who couldn't control his own selfish instincts. Wolves love fiercely, Jon Snow. They love truly, but they love only once. For your mother, as for your Uncle Brandon, they would not be forced to go against their nature. And so, the realm heard their howls. You liked her, my mother? Jon asked, wiping the tears from his eyes. No, Jon Snow, Nan replied, her voice softening. I loved your mother. Now, go. Time grows late, and I grow weary. We shall speak again, for there is much you must know before I go to meet my mother once more. Jon stood up from the chair, preparing to leave. But just as he reached the door, Nan called out to him, and he turned back. Jon stepped back, momentarily captivated by her smile. For just a fleeting moment, he caught a glimpse of the woman she once was. Her long, dark hair cascaded around her shoulders, her eyes sparkled with life, and her skin was smooth and unblemished. When she saw him, she smiled, but just as quickly, the vision faded, and old Nan stood before him once more. I thank you for my boy Jon Snow, she said, her voice warm. I had feared he was lost to me forever, but your white dragon was far truer than his. Jon was taken aback by her words, and they lingered in his mind as he made his way back to his room. Upon arriving, he found his sister waiting outside. The look she gave him was comical as she attempted to appear fierce. I did not expect you here, little wolf, she teased. Where were you? Arya asked. I was talking to a friend. Why's your door locked? To keep little wolves from playing in places they shouldn't, Jon replied, reaching over to ruffle her hair, eliciting a giggle from her. Are you going to get me my bow now? Arya asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. Would you wait until tomorrow? He chuckled. No, she replied, shaking her head. Jon laughed heartily. Well then, it seems we must go see the smith, shall we? He said, extending his hand for her to hold. Really? You're doing it? Arya looked at him, her expression questioning. I said I would, didn't I? Thank you, thank you, thank you, she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. As they walked to see Mikken, they encountered Loras and eventually Sansa. Sansa couldn't believe Jon was actually getting a bow for her sister, while Loras laughed at the thought. Arya, however, did not take his laughter well, and Loras soon learned this when she kicked him in the shin. Arya, you can't go around kicking lords in the shin, he said, wincing. Why not? He was being stupid, she retorted. Arya, Sansa admonished loudly. Nah, she's right, Sansa. Loras is stupid, Jon chimed in, and Arya nodded in agreement. Sansa opened her mouth to respond, but Jon winked at her, and she nodded, realizing the moment was better left unsaid. Jape, Jon said with a grin. I suppose he is, Sansa replied mockingly. Oh, you wound me. You all wound me so. Loras exclaimed in an overly exaggerated tone, causing everyone to burst into laughter. Told you, Arya chimed in, making them laugh even harder. It seemed Mikken needed some convincing that they had Lord Stark's permission to fit his youngest daughter with a bow. However, Jon managed to get him to take measurements from Arya, which at least prevented her from getting annoyed. Once they were finished, they headed back to the keep and went to their rooms to prepare for dinner. Later, when they met up with Loras, they entered the great hall to find everyone in a surprisingly subdued mood. At the high table, Jon noticed his uncle seemed lost in thought, while Lady Catelyn focused more on her son than on anyone else. Robb and Theon barely spoke, and as Jon sat down, he could see Arya and Sansa were uncomfortable. He wasn't sure whether to joke or be serious given the tension in the hall. Surprisingly, the atmosphere was lightened by the unlikeliest of sources as Walder stood up and began to sing. These rivers run too deep. With schemes of men for days that lay ahead. They sell their souls so cheap. They breed mistrust and fill my heart with dread. When did the boy become a man? And lose his life to learn? So much confusion to this plan. These times are not changing. Show me the love to keep us together. Open up your hearts, don't turn me away. Comfort me through this stormy weather. From where I stand, I see a broken land. This boy has learned to fail. In times like these, to cry seems so absurd. His own life's crisis pales in the shadow of this truly dying world. These are the games we played so cruel. Our hands raised in despair. With no exception to the rule. These times are not changing. Show me the love to keep us together. Open up your hearts, don't turn me away. Comfort me through this stormy weather. From where I stand, I see a broken land. Where is the love to keep us together? Open up your hearts, don't turn me away. Comfort me through this stormy weather. From where I stand, I see a broken land. Jon looked around the hall, seeing faces that reflected the weight of the moment. Amazed, Sansa beamed while Arya wore a look of confusion. Jon noticed Walder glance his way and nod before taking his seat, prompting Jon to stand up and begin clapping. Soon, everyone else joined in, and Walder appeared embarrassed by the attention. However, it was Jaime's expression that caught Jon's eye. He sat there, completely shocked. Ignoring the curious gazes around him, Jon walked over to check on Jaime. But before he could reach him, Jaime had already left his seat and exited the hall. When Loras noticed this, he stood up and followed Jon as they both headed outside in search of their lord. After a while, they found Jaime near the sparring dummies, and Jon couldn't help but smile at the coincidence. Just over 4 years earlier, he had stood in the same spot, doing exactly what Jaime was doing now, striking a dummy with power but lacking technique. "Keep your chin up, boy," Jon said, recalling the first words Jaime Lannister had ever spoken to him. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean any offense," Jaime replied, and both he and Jon shared a laugh while Loras stood there, puzzled. "The day we met, I was doing the same thing. That's what Lord Jaime said to me, and that's how I responded," Jon explained, earning a chuckle from Loras. "My lord, is everything all right?" Jon asked. "Aye, Jon. It's just that song. I've heard it before," Jaime said, his voice shaky. "Oh, I haven't. Is it sung regularly somewhere?" Jon inquired, glancing at Loras, who shook his head. "No, it's not. I've only ever heard it sung by the man who wrote it," Jaime replied, his voice cracking. "Who wrote it, my lord?" Jon asked, his own voice trembling now as he searched Jaime's eyes. "Rhaegar Targaryen," Jaime said, and Jon stared at him in disbelief.